In the first episode of The American Office, Michael Scott calls Pam into his office and fires her. He tells her that stealing from the company is stealing from him, that he has to make an example, that this is the hardest part of his job. Pam starts to come apart. She's been there years, she's engaged, she has no other prospects, and everyone watching knows it. And then Michael breaks, delighted with himself, and tells her she's been punked and waits for her to enjoy it with him. She doesn't. She's furious and she's crying, and Michael keeps grinning at the camera like the timing was the problem. That scene is not an American invention. It's lifted, structure and rhythm and punchline intact from the British pilot, where David Brent does the same thing to Dawn and gets the same reaction. Steve Carell is doing Ricky Gervais's blocking. He's doing Gervais's little glance to the crew afterward, the check to see whether anyone's coming along. The first season of The Office is 6 episodes long, and it is the only stretch of the show where you can watch a piece of software running on hardware it wasn't built for. The usual way of talking about this is developmental. Season 1 is the rough draft. Carell hadn't found the character, the writers hadn't found the tone. Everyone was still doing an impression until they figured out the real thing. There's something to that, but it treats the problem as a matter of skill, as though the American show was aiming at Season 3 and kept missing. The more useful way to look at it is structural. Nothing in Season 1 is done badly. It's done for a different show, a show with an ending. Start with what David Brent is for. The British Office is 12 episodes and a 2-part special, and Gervais and Merchant knew the shape of the whole thing before they shot any of it. Brent is constructed as a man who will be exposed. That's his function. Every scene is depositing evidence into a case that gets closed at the end of Series 2 when he's fired, and then reopened in the special so he can be humiliated at length in front of the country before he's granted a small mercy in the final 10 minutes. Because there's an endpoint, the show can afford to make him genuinely unpleasant. You are being asked to tolerate a man for 6 hours, and the reward is watching the world catch up to him. His cruelty is an investment. Every awful thing he does raises the value of the moment when the consequences arrive. Brent's other structural advantage is the country he's in. The British Office is about a specific kind of English stasis, a paper company in Slough, a workforce with nowhere else to go, a culture where ambition is faintly embarrassing and the correct posture is grim endurance. Brent's crime in that world is that he thinks he's above it. He performs specialness in a room full of people who have accepted that they aren't special. The class comedy does half the work of making him unbearable, and it does it without the script having to say anything. Now transplant that into an American network sitcom with an open-ended order. The first thing that breaks is the ending. NBC is not building toward Michael Scott's exposure. NBC is building toward Season 9. A character whose entire architecture points at a reckoning has to be run on a loop instead, and exposure doesn't loop. You can catch a man out once. If you catch him out every Thursday, the catching stops meaning anything and the audience learns that nothing sticks. The second thing that breaks is the setting. The American show needs Dunder Mifflin to be a place worth returning to weekly. That's the entire premise of a long-running workplace comedy. The office becomes a room the audience wants to be in. Brent's operating system is designed to make an office intolerable. It converts every group interaction into a performance with 1 participant and 11 hostages. So in Season 1, you have a boss actively degrading a space the format needs you to enjoy, and no ending in sight to justify the degradation. Watch what this does to the individual episodes, because it's visible in all 6. The pilot is the closest to a straight remake, and it's the one where the friction is easiest to name, because you can put the 2 versions side by side. But the interesting cases are the original episodes, where American writers were producing new material for a character they had inherited rather than designed. Diversity Day is the 2nd episode and the most notorious thing Michael ever does. He hijacks a mandatory sensitivity seminar, hands out index cards with ethnicities written on them, tells his employees to treat each other as stereotypes, and personally does an accent at Kelly Kapoor until she hits him. On paper, this is more aggressive than anything in the British show. Brent never runs an actual racism workshop, and yet the engine underneath it is already American. Look at why Michael is doing it. Corporate sent a trainer because Michael performed a Chris Rock routine at work, and someone complained. The trainer stands in front of Michael's staff and makes him sign a document in public as a child would be made to apologize. Michael's seminar is what he does immediately afterward, a rival production, launched to reclaim the room, with his name on it. The cruelty is downstream of an injury. Michael was made small in front of people whose regard is the only thing keeping him upright, and he responds by seizing the podium back. Brent's cruelty doesn't run on that. Brent is vain. He believes he's talented, funny, enlightened, and the comedy comes from the gap between his self-assessment and the room's assessment. He isn't hurt in these scenes. He's pleased with himself. The audience is invited to enjoy knowing something about him that he doesn't know. Michael, even here in the most offensive half hour the show ever produced, is being written as a wound. The American writers had already started building the machine that would make Season 3 work. They just hadn't built the rest of it. Healthcare is the clearest look at the mismatch. Michael is told to pick a cheaper plan, refuses the unpleasant part of the job, and hands it to Dwight, who cuts everything with obvious relish. The staff turns on him. Michael, cornered, promises a surprise, something big at the end of the day to make up for it, and then spends the entire episode hiding in his office with the blinds down because there is no surprise and there was never going to be one. That's a Brent move executed perfectly. Avoidance, escalation. A promise made to buy 40 minutes of goodwill with no plan for the bill. Then the American show does something the British show wouldn't. At the end, Michael comes out and admits it. He tells them there's nothing, and that he wanted there to be something, and the admission is played without a rescue. He isn't caught. He confesses. Brent confesses to nothing. Brent's relationship to his own failures is a permanent renegotiation, and the closest he comes to honesty is the last 10 minutes of a Christmas special that has spent 4 hours earning it. Michael gives it up in episode 3 because the American show cannot afford a lead who never lets you in. Weekly television requires a door. Basketball runs the same collision through a plot. Michael assembles a team, tells Phyllis she can't play, treats the warehouse staff as an opposing army, and then, when the game slips away from him, calls a foul that didn't happen so he can end it in his favor. Petty, transparent, exactly Brent-shaped. But the episode also spends time on Michael's genuine belief that the game will bond everyone, and on his eagerness beforehand, and on the fact that he wants the warehouse guys to like him more than he wants to win. The material keeps splitting. Half of it is written as vanity and half as need, and the two halves want different reaction shots from the room, which is where the real mechanism lives. Because the room is the part season 1 hadn't built yet. Go back and watch how Dunder Mifflin responds to Michael in those 6 episodes. Pam is exhausted by him and doesn't hide it. Jim is checked out, running his own private comedy with the camera. Dwight is a competitor, sharper and colder than he'll ever be again, and his loyalty hasn't curdled into worship yet. Ryan is embarrassed to be in the building. Stanley, Angela, Oscar, Kevin, Phyllis, most of them barely speak. Nobody in that office likes Michael Scott. Nobody covers for him. Nobody looks at him with the particular expression the show would later specialize in, the one where a person is annoyed, and also, against their own interests, protective. That expression is the whole retrofit. The later seasons don't change Michael's behavior nearly as much as people remember. He still hijacks meetings, still makes things about himself, still says the unsayable thing at the worst possible moment. What changes is that the camera cuts to Pam trying not to smile, or Jim absorbing it with the patience of a man dealing with a sibling, or Dwight taking the man completely seriously. Those cutaways are instructions. They tell the audience how to file what they just saw. Season 1 has the same behavior with no instructions attached. The camera cuts to people who are simply annoyed, and annoyance is not a reading. It's the absence of one. The other thing that changes is competence. And this is worth watching in Season 1 because it's genuinely different. Michael in these episodes is bad at the job in a plain, unglamorous way. He doesn't know his numbers. He can't handle a personnel decision. He avoids paperwork, mishandles the health plan, botches a birthday, wastes an entire workday on a seminar about himself. There's no counterweight. Nothing in the 6 episodes suggests this branch runs well or that anyone would keep him. The later show installs a counterweight and installs it deliberately. Michael becomes an extraordinary salesman. He can walk into a client meeting and close something nobody else could close. Scranton outperforms every other branch. Corporate keeps him because he produces, and that fact underwrites everything else. It converts him from a man who shouldn't be there into a man who is there for reasons. Which is what you need if the audience is going to spend 9 years in his building. Brent needs no such counterweight. Brent shouldn't be there. That's the point of him, and the show only has to sustain it for 12 episodes before firing him. Then there's the camera, which the two shows use for opposite purposes. Gervais plays Brent as a man managing an image. He knows the crew is there. He plays to them constantly. He's aware of the documentary as a career opportunity. The camera is his stage and also his trap. It records the performance and the failure of the performance in the same shot, and the audience watches him not notice. Carell in Season 1 imports that awareness. The glances at the crew after a joke dies, the little recovery smiles. The sense of a man checking his own coverage. It's a good impression of a specific acting choice. By Season 2, he's playing something else. Michael stops managing the camera and starts appealing to it. The crew becomes the one audience that has to keep listening. And the talking heads turn into a man explaining himself to strangers because the people in the next room have stopped asking. Same setup, opposite vector. Brent uses the documentary. Michael leans on it. None of this is a story about people getting better at their jobs. Carell knew how to play Michael Scott in the pilot. The writers knew how to build an episode. What they hadn't done was decide what the show was going to do with a man built to be found out. Inside a format where nobody is ever found out, on a network expecting 100 more episodes. Season 1 is the 6 weeks before that decision. Every element of the later show is already in the room. The wound underneath the cruelty, the confession at the end of the day. The need dressed up as authority, sitting next to a set of British parts that were engineered for an ending nobody was going to write. So go back to the fake firing. Pam crying at the desk, Michael grinning, the crew silent. In Slough, that scene is an argument. It teaches you what David Brent is in the first 15 minutes, so you'll know how to watch the next 11 episodes and what to feel when the bill arrives. In Scranton, it teaches you nothing, because there's no bill and no next 11 episodes yet. The gag is identical, the performance is faithful, and the meaning is missing, waiting on a room full of people who hadn't yet learned how to look at him.